right, good evening. How you guys doing? Well, it is an election day in New York, but it is also 1 year minus 1 day to the presidential election. So we thought we would just start to warm things up. Well, actually, we can't really say that we started to warm things up because they've been pretty hot in this election, you know, what with allegations of sexual assault, allegations of campaign finance malfeasance, race issues, religion issues around Mormonism, basically on and on and on. This is an election that already really early has set a benchmark for conflict. And we're going to talk about what's happening now. We're going to talk about what is going to happen in the future, and also an eye on what the issues are and not just the conflicts. And a little bit later, we're going to be joined by U.S. Congresswoman Yvette Clarke of the 11th District in Brooklyn, and Dan Isaacs, chairman of the New York Republican County Committee. But first, though, we're going to have Micah Sifry come on up, who co-founded the influential Personal Democracy Forum and analyzes the influence of technology on elections for his blog, techpresident.com. And Talib Kweli, come on up, rapper, entrepreneur, activist, independent political pundit. And you can find out more about his record label, his collaborations, his releases of other artists, including Jean Grey, at yearoftheblacksmith.com. And so I want to give special thanks to theroot.com for simulcasting tonight's video webcast. And just to tee things up, let's take a quick look at some video of what we've seen in the campaign so far.
Anybody watching, listening, following online, I want you to call, I want you to email, I want you to tweet, I want you to fax, I want you to visit, I want you to Facebook, send a carrier pigeon. I want you to tell your congressperson the time for gridlock and games is over. The time for action is now.
What do you make of that dynamic just happened here? The mention of the execution of 234 people drew applause.
I think Americans understand justice. I think Americans are clearly, in the vast majority of cases, supportive of capital punishment.
The state tax is an apple. We are replacing the current tax code with oranges. So it's not correct to mix apples and oranges. Secondly, it is not a value-added tax. If you take most of the products, take a loaf of bread. It does have 5 taxes in it right now. What the 9% does is that we take out those 5 invisible taxes and replace it with one visible 9%.
If I'm President of the United States, on my first day in office, I will issue an executive order which directs the Secretary of Health and Human Services to provide a waiver from Obamacare to all 50 states. That law is bad, it's unconstitutional, it shall not stand.
All right, Talib, we heard some fruit salad there, apples and oranges. We heard about the death penalty, and we heard about Obamacare, which is surprisingly similar to Mitt Romney's own health care plan that he promoted when he was governor. So what do you make, you're a real independent political voice. What do you make of the campaign thus far?
Well, what's interesting to me is that in all my life of sort of paying a little bit attention to politics here and there, being excited about certain figures and certain symbols and certain people. I've never been someone who's agreed with the GOP or agreed with Republicans. But early in my life, I'm 36 now, I can remember at least there being respect for the process from even people I didn't agree with. And I can remember even being able to even have some sort of understanding for why someone would have an idea, a position that I don't agree with. Now, it's all politics. if it was a music business, they would say it's all swag. It's all fluff. What I see coming from the GOP, the pool of candidates is just dismal. And I don't see how any self-respecting Republican can look at what their options are and feel good about their party at this point. I've never seen it that bad. Not that I've ever wanted to be a Republican, but I've never seen it this bad. And, as far as Barack Obama, I could relate to a lot of things about what he was saying to my own career and things I'm going through. When he first came out, when he was campaigning, when he was getting people on Twitter and doing the grassroots style community campaigning, he was a young, fresh, it was a fresh, exciting thing. And, when I put my vote in for him, I was voting for him as a man, him as a symbol. I look at our current political process and I didn't think he could get anything done. And I'm surprised at the amount of stuff that he's been able to get done. I feel like he's a better politician now, but he's not being treated in the media, even by people who so-called support him, as a better politician. With me as my career, I felt like people were very excited when I first came out, but it becomes hard to keep people that excited when you're so consistent and you keep doing it for so long. It's like people are not surprised anymore. So now when I approach how to sell my music, it's not about trying to convince someone to take a chance on me. Because at 20 years into my career, trying to convince someone to take a chance on me, it makes me look foolish. So I think when Obama is trying to convince someone to take a chance on him, it makes him look weaker than he actually is. But I think when you look at the statistics and look at what he's done technically, he's been one of the better presidents of our time.
So it's interesting because you and I spoke at a point when you weren't interested in voting for most candidates, and it sounds like President Obama switched that equation for you. So what was your thought process when that happened?
Well, I've made public statements about my attitudes towards voting. I do not think that the voting system in this country works well at all. I'm not a fan of the Electoral College at all. And so, when I said I'm not voting, I'm not, because I can't participate in a process I don't agree with. But I can respect individuals. When I see people in the community who are working hard for the community, when I see them, if I could know who the best party promoter in the hood is, and I could know who the best drug dealer in the hood is, I should be able to know who the best politician is. I should be able to see them and touch them. And so when I see that, I support that. I support individuals, but also I'm a realist. It's like, I see, you have people like supporters like Cornel West and Tavis Smiley who expressed disappointment with Obama. But I feel like their expectations of him was too high. I look at what he's faced with, the administration, the current situation in the country that he came into, and man, I'm just I'm a pessimist when it comes to our political system, but I think that he's done a hell of a job.
Well, I do want to point out that we will have more Republican input in the panel. We were supposed to have Robert George with us. He's on his way, and he's on the editorial board of the New York Post. He's a African-American Republican and conservative, but he is busy covering Kane tonight, so he's a little delayed. So I just wanted to put that in context. But thank you. And Mika, when you think about this election, is it the president's to lose? I mean, is the Republican field sufficiently disorganized that it's just up to the president, or is, who are the stronger candidates among the field?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. This election, unfortunately, elections are not really about the candidate so much as they're about the state of the economy. That's what all the political science about American presidential elections tells us. And so President Obama, whatever his accomplishments, and he certainly has done a number of things, perhaps not getting as much credit as he deserves, it doesn't matter. 9% unemployment, and a sense that the country's moving in the wrong direction, which is now so widespread that I think Congress's approval rating is at something like 9%. And I defy anybody here. Somebody raise your hand if you approve of Congress. I mean, in theory, 1 out of 10 of you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
we have a congresswoman here.
yes. And who stood to her defense?
I stepped in that, but in all fairness, I'm sure you approve of the job you've been doing, but whether you approve of the job the whole institution is doing, that's what that number is. And I suspect you would say you're not happy with the direction that Congress is in at the moment. And so President Obama, yes, it does matter who ultimately gets the nomination. And I think certainly Mitt Romney seems to have a slightly better chance at the moment. If he gets the nomination, he may be a harder candidate for President Obama to run against than a more right-wing candidate like Rick Perry. I have to tell you, I don't particularly pretend to care that much about this question. I think what we should have learned from this last cycle, where there was so much enthusiasm, particularly among young people, new voters, coming into the process around the idea of electing an African-American president, which is quite important for our history, is that one man or woman cannot change the country. And this expectation that whoever the president is, that's going to be this determining factor. I mean, we should have learned by now that, first of all, the president isn't that strong. It's true in foreign policy more than domestic. And that Congress is designed to be this great system for blocking change. We have a Senate that puts inordinate amounts of power in senators who come from tiny states. The idea that the 2 senators from Idaho have as much power as the 2 senators from California or New York doesn't make sense. But things like that were put into the system to make it very hard to push change through. And it's clear that Washington has been captured in all kinds of ways by entrenched, wealthy special interests that just electing a president doesn't make a difference. And so whoever it is, I mean, I personally suspect that given the state of the economy and where things are going, that President Obama is going to lose. He's going to run a very good campaign. Technically, he'll run a very smart campaign, and he'll still lose because of the direction of the economy. I think that's going to make things really interesting for the next few years, because right now there already is a rising tide of unhappiness. We first saw it with the Tea Party. Now we're seeing it in an even bigger way with the Occupy Wall Street movement. And whoever's in the White House is going to be presiding over a period of economic disarray and political gridlock. Frankly, as a progressive, I kind of think that the chances for serious change happening will be greater if the person sitting in the White House in 2013 is a Republican, because they are naturally more allied with the forces that have captured Washington. The Democrats are kind of in this uneasy relationship with moneyed interests because they think they're also for the working people, even though they're mostly financed by the same people who finance the Republican Party. So
now
I think we're in for a really frustrating period for voters, because you're not going to get change you can believe in 2012.
All right, that's a very provocative statement that the president will lose. I've heard a lot of different predictions. I want to invite, we only have time for 2 people in each half of this program to come up to the microphones, but if anyone who wants to ask questions can go behind that column right there. I actually want to see, Carol, if you can come up right now. You can come to the microphone actually right here.
Hi.
So I want to introduce you, Carol Markowitz. You write a regular conservative political column for WNYC's political blog, It's a Free Country, and also a cultural column for the New York Post, and you have your own blog, Alarming News. So you have worked with campaigns. Tell us a little bit more about the work that you do, and what do you see when you hear this prediction, kind of what does it call up for you?
It's funny, I actually have the opposite prediction. I think it's really hard to beat an incumbent, and I think Americans are very big on giving the president a second chance. unless things get worse, if it stays at 9%, which, don't get me wrong, is really bad, I still think Obama pulls it out, which is not, what I want to happen, but I do think that incumbents are very hard to beat, and with the amount of money he's raising, and Micah had said that he would run a flawless campaign, which I predict also. I think it's going to be very tight.
So who do you think has the best shot out of the Republican field?
I went out on a crazy limb like 3 weeks ago and predicted that Rick Perry is going to mount a comeback, and I just want to preface that by saying that I called it for McCain last time when everyone said he was completely dead. So I don't know, my blink says it's going to be Perry, but I mean, obviously everybody in the world thinks I'm wrong, so we'll see.
All right, thanks. Do we have any questions thus far? From anyone else? All right, the mic will remain open, and oh, you have a question? Yeah, please come on up to the microphone and introduce yourself.
I'm Cheryl Huggins-Solomon, Deputy Editor of The Root, and talking about Occupy Wall Street and the popular sentiment behind that, is that something that will help progressives in the long run, or is the anger that you're seeing, is it going to be focused and directed enough to affect the campaign in a positive way?
I think Occupy Wall Street is changing the culture in ways that will change politics in a more progressive direction. We have a very serious problem of inequality in the United States. We have levels of disparity of wealth that are worse than in Egypt, and look what just happened there. But we don't talk about it, right? We don't talk about issues that that affect the lives of working people who barely get by. Our presidential candidates don't talk about the working class, they talk about the middle class. But 40%, 45% of Americans are working class. They don't talk about raising the minimum wage, and yet 85% of the public, if you ask them in polls, wants the minimum wage to be raised. We have a two-party process that is basically mostly just between the 40-yard lines of what's okay to talk about, and a media that doesn't expand that very much either, though the internet's changing that. And I think Occupy Wall Street has struck a nerve with this "we are the 99% frame, because it really speaks to something very deep for people that's been left out of the conversation perhaps as long as the 1930s. And they're talking about this idea of social solidarity, that we're all in it together, and they're doing it in a way that's much more authentic and real than anything I've seen that's come before. That's why it struck a nerve. The idea that people are camping out and not moving and putting their lives on the line in a way that professional politicians don't do, for the most part. Leaders occasionally do, but we're talking about the leaders at the level of like civil rights movement leaders or Nelson Mandela kinds of leaders. And I think that is the reason. It's been really interesting to watch how the right is responding to Occupy Wall Street. They're terrified of it because they realize that this shifts the frame. And once you get people talking about inequality and economic justice and what actually we all have in common against this tiny, tiny group of people who have basically rigged the game and gotten the spoils and don't get punished for it, that's political dynamite. And I think it may not be this election, but over the next few years, we're going to see politicians and organizations come forward with specific proposals and programs that will attempt to respond to this new mood. I think it's a very, very important trend, and it's one we'll probably be experiencing for several more years as it plays out.
And so, yeah.
I completely and totally agree with you about Occupy Wall Street, but I'm a little confused how you could have that position and still feel like the Republican agenda is the best agenda for the country. Because to me,
he didn't say that. He just said he thought that the Republican Party was going to win.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying I think in practical terms, this election is painfully going to be an anti-incumbent election. I think anybody who's in office right now is going to get punished. If you're an incumbent, your biggest worry is that the other party might put somebody good up. I mean, look at this race where Anthony Weiner's seat was a traditionally Democratic seat taken by a complete nobody, Bob Turner, you know, who, look, he had the good fortune of running for it 2 years ago, and so he was in the right place at the right time to step in and took advantage of this mood. It's not going away. And I think, look, if the Republicans nominate somebody really far to the right, that improves Obama's chances of getting reelected. But if they pick someone like Romney, who has shown that he can look presidential, act presidential, and be all things to all people, that may be enough.
Well, here's Robert George. And Talib, I wanted to ask you kind of along the lines, I know you've been following Occupy Wall Street. How do you see, a couple things, how do you see people of color fitting into Occupy Wall Street? There's been a big debate over whether or not there is a significant presence. And secondly, do you think that a lot of the young people who were first-time voters in 2008 are going to come back in 2012, especially when the youth unemployment rate is at least 25%, and the youth unemployment rate for African Americans and Latinos is far higher than that?
You know, I think with the Occupy Wall Street, the thing with the urban community is, look, we've been broke for a long time, you know, and no one's been protesting or even cared. So it's sort of a thing of, okay, so what? Along with the thing of, you know, a lot of people who are living in the hood don't have the resources to be able to go sleep in a park, you know. So these people who are sleeping in Zuccotti Park are representing the hood, but there is a disconnect there, and there are organizations, you know, the people, you know, from MXG. There's certain organizations in the black community in these neighborhoods who are reaching out because they're activist based. But as far as the general, no, there's definitely a disconnect, which is why me, as someone who is supportive of Occupy Wall Street, I feel like it's my duty to be down there and to explain the similarities.
And what about first-time voters from 2008? Do you think they're going to come back, especially?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, just going back to talking about the president, you know, the reason I had an issue with voting because I had never seen someone like Obama before. You know, if you had told me before Eminem that there was going to be a white rapper that was going to be better than everybody, I'd have been like, yeah, right. I've never seen it before. You know what I'm saying? Now, in 2012, he's on the cover of GQ. They calling him a king of rap. You know? So it's like until you see it, you don't know it exists. Now, with Obama, I had never seen a politician like that before. So he changed the way that I looked at politicians. And I think there's a lot of people in my generation who, you know, the traditional wisdom is, like you were saying, it's the economy, stupid. Like, that's the traditional political wisdom. But, you know, I think that's a very traditional wisdom. I don't think that's how it is anymore. I think people are voting based on, whether for better or for worse, voting based on, at least in presidential politics, which I think they will come out for, even when they don't come out for local stuff. They're voting on their gut, how someone makes them feel. And I think that's what carried Obama. And I don't think there's anyone in the Republican field besides maybe a Sarah Palin, maybe, you know, but I mean, I don't think there's anyone who's even come close.
Well, I want to bring in Robert George now.
I was just going to say, I wonder if white people would have accepted that trade-off a few years ago. You get hip hop, and black people get the White House.
So, Robert, you are at the editorial board of the New York Post, and you are a stand-up comedian, a conservative of West Indian descent from New York. You got all sorts of different things that we could attach to you as meta tags. So before you got here, and we understand that you were covering Kane.
Yeah, well, the dangers of working for a daily newspaper are you sometimes become a servant to deadlines and breaking news, and so I got stuck in the office, so I apologize for being tardy.
Oh, no, I completely appreciate it. So Mija said that the Republican Party is going to win on a sort of general anti-incumbency push. And Carol, who you know, said that she thinks that the Democratic Party is going to win. So we've got
the White House.
The White House. Yeah. So what do you think? What do you see in your crystal ball?
Oh gosh, putting me on the spot right off the bat. I would say that surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, I'll be kind of agreeing with Carol. I think right now, as bad as things look for Obama, and based on history in terms of the high level of unemployment and just general frustration, I would say that he'd be favored. I think he'd be favored for reelection right now. I mean, I think it could be very, very narrow. It's in many, not just me, other people have made this comparison. When Bush won in 2004, he won with the narrowest re-election margin of any president re-elected for a second term. He got 53%, which was incredibly narrow, and obviously that was coming off of the 2000 race. And it's looking like the map, which Obama kind of expanded in favor of the Democrats in 2008, is actually going to end up looking more like a 2004 race, but slightly favoring Obama. Now, that said, it should also be noted that even with all of the problems that Jimmy Carter had in 1976, excuse me, in 1980. He was neck and neck with Ronald Reagan through the summer of 1980 and well into the fall. Now the big caveat there was that they just had only one presidential debate, and right after that debate there was Reagan was seen not as the big bogeyman, and the race tipped. So that shows both the opportunities and the dangers for Obama. He obviously is still certainly able to raise money. Something that Obama has something that Obama doesn't have, that Carter had to deal with, was a challenge from the left, which Obama is not facing, and so he's got a lot of things going in his favor. And the Republicans, even though Romney is running close to Obama, the Republicans still have to get their brand back together, and that brand is still kind of weighing them down right now, and there's kind of a pox on both their houses, and Obama is slightly benefiting from that.
Well, Talib, I know you have to go soon, so I just want to ask you one final question before you do. We've been talking about electoral politics, and I get excited about that, but there's everyday politics of what food exists in your neighborhood grocery stores. Does your neighborhood even have a grocery store? Education, all that. When you look at the sort of real politics of people's lives, what do you want to see changed, and what's a priority for you as you look at the landscape?
I think I'm in a place where my priorities are shifting. My first half of my life was spent, sort of allowing the talent to carry me, because I'm good at a creative thing, at my craft. I didn't think so much about my day-to-day, what's happening the next day. I just figured I could go do another show, make another song, make some money. I have children. My children are of age now where they're in school, and I'm starting to want to save for college and stuff like that. So as I get to this point in my life, and I move back into the neighborhood I grew up in, and my daughter's going to the school that I went to, and when I was her age, it makes me want, and knowing how I benefited from growing up in this community in Brooklyn, at this stage in my life, is making me want to participate more in community politics and things in general, whether it's shopping at the food co-op or whether it's riding my bike to the city as opposed to taking car service, or just things that I'm doing in my life. But I think it's something that's learned. It's not something that I think most people are thinking about when they're in their 20s. I think you have to go through a certain amount of experiences to know how important it is to truly participate. And I'm someone who's I'm considered a voice of the people. I'm considered an activist. But the reason why I'm considered that is very easy for me. It's because of the words I write. Now, it's not easy to write rap songs. It's not easy to do. But once I know how to do that, it then becomes easy to represent for the community within that device. So now it's not just about the song per se and representing this on stage. And not to say that I've never participated in community politics or activism and stuff. But the career and the music is definitely, without a doubt, first for me, for the first half of my life. And those things are starting to change.
Well, Talib Kweli, thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you.
We know you got a long night ahead. Thank you. So I appreciate it. You take good care. So what I'm going to do now is invite our additional guest up. We have some really wonderful folks with us who represent a diversity of the political spectrum. So I think that the four of us will continue this conversation. We'd like to invite up U.S. Representative Yvette D. Clarke. She's a Brooklyn native, first elected to Congress in November of 2006. Please come on up. And she represents the 11th Congressional District, communities including Crown Heights, Sunset Park, and Park Slope. And we also have with us Daniel Isaacs, come on up, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the New York Republican County Committee. He's been active in the GOP since he founded the College Republicans at SUNY Stony Brook in 1985, and he was a candidate for the New York State Assembly in the 89th District in 1996. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So I just have to find out, like, just on the basic question of who do you expect to win the White House next time? Just give me a brief answer on that, and then we'll circle back to all the other stuff on the table. What do you think, Congresswoman?
President Barack Hussein Obama.
Okay. Dan?
The Republican nominee, whomever that might be.
Because we started out with two Republicans saying that they both thought that the Democrat would take the White House, and a progressive thinking that the Republican would. So I had to at least see if there was. So now we have a progressive who thinks that the Republicans will take the White House, two conservatives who think that the Democrat President Obama will take the White House, a Democratic Congresswoman who thinks that Obama will take the White House, and a GOP, executive who thinks that the Republican will take the White House. So I think we've done pretty well here, as a cross section. So let me start with you, Congresswoman. You have to deal with, I've covered Congress at different times, and basically one of the things that I always think about is that at any given moment, approximately half of your colleagues may want to thwart what you want to do. That's a very tough work environment. So how do you operate within that framework, especially at a time like now when, really the two parties are at each other's throats?
It's extremely difficult now. I'm going to be very honest. If I weren't going through this because I'm concerned about the people that I represent in Central Brooklyn, I would be just totally floored by the level of intransigence that is taking place in Washington right now. The fact that adults can't come together for the greater good of the nation and put aside partisan concerns and talk about the morality of what we do. What is morally right, and then working from there. I'm a relatively new member of Congress, elected and started serving in 2007, elected in 2006. So it's interesting. I hear some of my colleagues who have been what I consider to be longtime stakeholders lamenting about the good old days when the parties did discuss things with each other, where they did find common cause in terms of policy. I have yet to experience that.
Do you think that the atmosphere has degraded, Daniel?
Absolutely. I've never seen it worse than it is today, and the Congresswoman is absolutely right. I think part of the problem is you have this entrenched culture in Washington, D.C. that looks at it as an entity unto itself, not answerable to the people who put them there in the first place. I mean, long-term incumbency is a very dangerous thing. I was at a function last night with I will not name the U.S. Senator, but very, very proud to say he was running for his 7th term as a U.S. Senator. I'm 46 years old. I'm thinking to myself, this guy's been U.S. Senator almost my entire life. I mean, and that's a big problem. Mm-hmm. They don't feel they're answerable. Mikva had commented earlier about the lobbyists. They're the ones who really run Washington, D.C., the K Street lobbyists with the donations. and the Wall Street folks who are dumping money in to both parties. I mean, President Obama has gotten a very large share of his re-election campaign money from the very Wall Street fat cats that he's lambasting every day, and that's a big, big problem.
So you are the CEO of the GOP in New York County.
Yes.
New York County is not known as a GOP stronghold. So how do you?
Not yet. We're working on it, though.
So how do you operate in this environment? Like how do you try to
carefully? Well, look, it's funny. In New York County, we are out registered 6 or 7 to 1. It has been a number of years since we had Republicans in office. 2000 was the last time we had an elected official. But it wasn't too far long ago that Manhattan, particularly the Upper East Side, was known as a Republican area. We had the state senator and Roy Goodman. We had city councilmen like Charlie Millard. We had state assemblymen. But over time, the voting demographics changed, and quite frankly, our party at the time did not do a good job of recruiting young people to run for office. And quite frankly, that could be said about the Republican Party as a whole for many years here in New York State. But what we do here as a Republican Party is Manhattan, in particular, is the world center for media, for finance, and we use that as an opportunity to showcase ourselves, our Republican principles. We have every major candidate running for office, whether it's for governor, U.S. Senate, president, coming into New York to raise money. And if I had some strength, I would tell all these guys that they need to help build the party here if they're going to take our money and leave. So at least we get our name out there on the map, and we're trying to recruit young people. We're engaged in the minority communities, trying to get minorities and women to be running for office. So it's not easy, but someone's got to do the job. So,
well, I'll just toss this out to either Mika. I'll go with you first. Basically, one of your specialties is the internet and politics, and you have been really analyzing this for quite a while on techpresident.com and with the Personal Democracy Forum that you co-run. When I go on Twitter, I subscribe to a ton of different types of Twitter feeds, from Tea Party to, absolute left. And there's no cross conversation. There's just two sets of people having conversations within their silos. That's what I see for the most part. From the look on your face, you don't see that? You see more cross conversation?
Well, I'm sort of interrupting your question, but what I see online is you're one click away from someone who disagrees with you. And if you have any kind of site that allows commenting, you're often hearing from people who disagree with you quite strongly. I'm sure Robert would agree that he hears all the time from people who disagree with him. And, years and years ago, I worked at The Nation magazine, and I never looked at the National Review because it meant I had to go get a copy of it. But now I'm one click away. And I do look at what people from different points of view have to say. There's a big argument over whether the internet is helping build bridges or just polarize us more. Eli Pariser has a very interesting book where he talks about the filter bubble, the idea that we are even unknowingly being sorted into these segregated communities where we just see on our Facebook feed the opinions of people who we already agree with, for which he blames companies like Facebook and Google for in effect, doing that without us knowing. But I think that the fact that we're polarized is not the fault of the internet. I think that's something deeper that's going on in our politics right now, which is it's very binary. My question, as I think about how technology is putting more power into our own hands and how in our everyday lives we can participate more fully and we have many more choices. The idea that we are stuck with a political system that was designed in the 18th century, the idea that winner take all is the only way to dole out representation, for example. Why haven't we updated that? There are many other ways to ensure that more voices have a say in the process. Proportional representation, for example, which is most of the democracies in the world use, except for a few, like the United States. And why we do this, why we don't change it, it's beyond me. I think what's fascinating about the time that we live in, as the two parties beat each other up and just make Americans more and more frustrated with the whole political system, is that we are approaching a moment where more people are just going to say, we have to start over. We have to revise this system, bring it up to date to the 21st century. I think the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street may actually be in they're different sides of a similar coin here. And where they may find common ground is the idea that the current process has to be completely overhauled. And as Dan was saying, one of those fundamental problems is the way that money, concentrated money, dominates Washington. 1/4% of Americans make 80% of the campaign contributions. Okay? Talk about the 1%. I'm talking about the 1/4%. And so when you feel like your interests aren't being represented, well, join the club. That's how the system works now. And, you know, when Steve Jobs died, I thought it was fascinating the way everybody was lionizing him, and for good reason, because the guy showed how we could make unbelievably good products that transform how people live. And we're not getting that from our political process right now, but we are all experiencing in our personal lives the potential for this kind of personally empowering technology to enable us to have a much fuller role. So with all due respect to the incumbents, I think there is a big wave coming. This election is just going to be a piece of. And that big wave is going to really be about transforming and reforming how American democracy works.
If I can add just one thing about talking about the power incumbency, and I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of changes. But when I ran for office back in the mid-'90s for the New York State Assembly here, one of my little shticks when I would go around campaigning is telling people that the Politburo, during the height of Russian or Soviet communism, had a higher turnover rate than the New York State legislature. I mean, if you were elected to office in New York State, you either left in handcuffs or you were carried out. And it really hasn't changed. You know, there's a very, very, very little turnover. And when you have that incumbency, that power, it's tough to break. And that's one of the advantages that the president have. I think he has other problems that will overtake that, and that's why I don't think he'll be successful. But I do think that there's a big wave of change coming, and the Bob Turner race was an example of that.
I mean, despite what I said before, there's still a good possibility, given what there is, that sort of strong anti-incumbency feeling that's growing. It's not out of the question that you could see the three governing parts, the three parts of the government, all turn out. It's possible that the president could lose, the Republicans could lose the House, and the Democrats could lose the Senate. I mean, and if you looked at the what do they call it, the generic race between Republican and Democrat, that certainly is possible in the House, and the Democrats are on the defensive in the Senate as well. The level of frustration that there is across the country, that you could just see this complete and total, a pox on all of them, and we want whoever's in there now. We want the other guys. We want the other guys in.
Well, 77% of Americans think our country's headed in the wrong direction, and it's not just a Democrat problem; it's a Republican problem as well. You know, our powers to be are not doing their jobs, and the people are frustrated. With some exceptions.
Let me just jump in here to say that it's great to sort of theorize on what can happen and how you limit it. To a large extent, I tell people democracy is a living, breathing organism. So to the extent that people become so frustrated that they now begin to understand their obligation and role in the process and the life of democracy, then I think we're actually moving to a level of enlightenment that is required to do some of the things that you're talking about. So I think everything is, quite frankly, in divine order. And I think that as younger cohorts of voters begin to understand what it is to have this franchise and how powerful it becomes when you feel concerned about the issues and the policies that are being discussed and bantered, then you recognize the role that you must play in order to change the dynamic. And there are those who talk about the money in politics, and it's absolutely true that there's a corruptive element to having lobbyists give inordinate amounts of money to certain candidates. I've seen the impact of that. The other side to it is that when you make the decision, the conscious decision to go through the people for the financing, there's a whole nother dynamic that arises as a result of that. And there are many members of Congress that have chosen that route. Now, they make themselves much more vulnerable, but they also keep a certain level of independence. That also opens you up to attack, because of course the powers that be want people who will speak their language, will do their bidding. And to the extent that you accept contribution, then you're saying I'm willing to compromise on that. We are going through an educational process. You yourself must take
contributions, because that's the only way to win.
The vast majority of my contributions, actually, you must not have seen my filings, but the vast majority of my contributions come from the people I represent. And so that puts me at a disadvantage. And I'm always highlighted in the press as, oh, she doesn't raise money. No, I do. I raise it from individuals who are stakeholders in my community who want to be represented by a voice that is not going to be sold out to a whole host of interests in Washington. I remember who sent me there. And to the extent that they're in a position to be supportive of me, I welcome it. To the extent that they're not, I still want them to know that I'm going to speak about their experience and what they expect in terms of policy coming out of Washington. And, it's a conscious effort. Each member has to make that determination. The parties have to make those determinations, because to the same extent that it happens in the Democratic Party, it happens in the Republican Party. So we're talking about the same interests, just trying to find points of entry from different perspectives.
Well, I want to bring up another one of our guests here. We've got Chet Y., who's the campaign director of Harlem for Obama. Why don't you step on up to the microphone?
Good evening.
How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good.
So as you're listening to all this, we're having a wide-ranging discussion, and I want to get back to the whole question of structural reform of politics, because as much as I myself would be eager to see structural reform, I don't see it happening anytime soon. But we'll get back to that.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. So within the structure that we have now, obviously you've picked your candidate, President Obama. You're out there working on getting Harlem energized. What are you putting out in terms of messaging, and what are you getting back in terms of response?
Well, we have done this analysis of what we did wrong in the last 4 years, and everyone's talking about giving Obama this litmus test, and especially progressives. But we allowed that there was a debate occurring, especially on the street, and we were absent from it. And I explained to a lot of people, we had a so-called Tea Party rally from us up in Harlem a few weeks ago, where we talked about tea and civility, and we talked about the need for us to be out in the street and pushing our agenda, that our angst should not be relegated to Facebook and Twitter. It's not the tweet, it's the street. And we looked at what had occurred since the election, and I reminded people we were on the corner of 125th and Adam Clayton Powell. And said, for a lot of us, the last time we were here was election night in 2008. And then we left the street and the Tea Party came in, and they seized the debate. And not only did they do that, control the debate, they wound up really hijacking the government. And now we look at Occupation Wall Street, which we love and we've supported. I mean, I walked from 125th Street down to Zuccotti Park yesterday with a whole bunch of folks who were very passionate about it. With Occupation Wall Street, they have also entered the street and changed the debate, at least seized the debate. And the discussion is about, what they're doing. And, America has had a chance to really vent its angst through them. And we see a lot of possibilities in that. And we had to remind people, especially up in Harlem, that Occupy Wall Street isn't the genesis of this kind of action. Before there was an Occupy Wall Street, there was an Occupy lunch counter. There was an Occupy front of the bus. There was Birmingham, there was Selma, there was a whole plethora of things that are in our legacy and in our DNA. So it's natural for us to be out in the street pushing agenda. And what happened in the black community pervasively, I would say across the country, I'm going to be short with this, we saw the choices between like healthcare and jobs, and we sort of laid back when our positions weren't in the forefront because we thought we would hurt this president. And our absence from that push, I think, actually hurt him tremendously. He wasn't able to point to constituencies that were in pain and say that they have legitimate issues that we need to address.
Well, but I do remember, the Congressional Black Caucus basically all but picketing the White House at certain points. I mean, in the last CBC weekend, there was a whole jobs initiative that was laid out by the Congressional Black Caucus that was very challenging of the president. So do you find that?
Well, it's not so much just challenging the president. It's challenging, the Congress itself. It's being there when legislation is being debated, and we weren't there.
So I think you're making a really interesting point about what happened after the election, where you said, the Tea Party came into the street and the Obama side wasn't really in the street. And I've puzzled on this for a long time. What happened? President Obama ran an amazing campaign in 2008. He had 13 million email addresses. That's 1 out of the 5 votes that he got. He had 4 million individual donors. He had 2 million people on his website, mybarackobama.com. The day after the election, the phones were ringing in Chicago. What do you want us to do? What do you want us to keep doing? And there was no plan. In fact, it took weeks. And the amazing thing is that people wanted to keep going. In December of 2008, there was a survey done of that big email list. 500,000 people said they wanted to be involved and engaged in helping the president move his agenda, and 100,000 of them said they wanted to run for lower offices. Think about all that energy, right? And my question has been, why didn't they do something with that until much, much later? Much later, they rebuilt an organization.
Well, here's the dynamics of that.
Yeah.
Right. Pervasively through the country, the big cities, the campaign itself was run by grassroots organizations. A lot of them made the mistake of shutting the door November 5th. And with that absence, we didn't have the mechanism to go out and do the kinds of things we wanted to do. The overall campaign had the list,
right,
but you have to have the ground support. You must have it.
Well, so there's a very, very important lesson, I think, in that, which I would take as that you don't just elect a president and give your name and your information to his campaign so that they have the information to build a machine and run a machine. That if voters want to be empowered, they have to keep that power.
They have to keep
locally.
It local.
Right?
All politics is local.
Yeah, if only they had some kind of, chief community organizer that could have marshaled all those people together.
They do have one, don't they? It's the president.
His name was Rahm
He's
Emanuel,
yanking your
as
chain.
you know, the well-known community organizer, Rahm Emanuel.
But that's a big problem for the president, though. That was a huge lost opportunity for him because if you look at the polling data that's coming out, he has lost a large segment those early supporters of his, particularly the young people, because they're frustrated. There's no job.
Well,
Someone
really
mentioned it
depends
earlier.
on which data and how recent the data is.
Just
that you're
reading
looking
the
at.
polls
If you look at the
the last few
data
weeks.
today,
Dan
that's not
says-
true. That's
when
not
Dan-
exactly
well,
true.
I think when Dan says lost, not necessarily meaning that they're going to be voting for Republicans.
May not vote at all.
But they've sort of kind of dropped out of the process and they need to be re-engaged. I think that's what you were saying.
And the engagement is incumbent upon us. We have to, we made a mistake when we brought people into the process by not explaining to them that between elections, there's a lot of democracy going on and you have to participate in it. You have to be at the table, and if you're not at the table, you're going to wound up on the menu.
That's absolutely right.
All right,
That's right.
Ched Y, thank you so much. So I see we have one questioner here. If there's someone else who wants to come up, we're not going to go to questions just yet, but hang out there. It's as we were talking about young people, I all of a sudden had a flashback to near the beginning of my journalism career when I worked at MTV News. And ever since the days of MTV News, starting, which was quite a while ago, 2 decades ago, people have been trying to inject youth-oriented politics with some kind of vim and vigor that's related not just to the issues but also to celebrities. And it seems to me that these experiments in celebrity, remember when Sean Combs had, I can't remember if it was in the Puff Daddy or the P. Diddy era, but Sean Combs had his own,
that was in 2004, right? When he was doing
exactly, and then
Die, I think.
Vote or
Die,
Vote or
yes,
Die,
exactly,
and then Vote or Die died. So what is? I mean, what?
And that was like 2 names ago, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So what is going to engage young voters who may be swing voters, not in the sense that they will swing wildly left or right, but swing voters in that they may not show up at all?
Great leaders. And that's the problem we have nowadays, is the political process does not encourage great people to get involved in the political process. Who wants to go through the meat grinder of running for political office? I mean, our country doesn't produce the great leaders that we have in the past. We don't have it.
I beg to differ.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
there are exceptions, Congresswoman, but generally speaking, it is very hard when you look. There's a lot of mediocrity in terms of people who run for office. Not everyone, but it is very hard to get people who provide substance, who bring that special dynamicism to running for office. People, when you think of an LBJ or a Kennedy or a Winston Churchill or a Ronald Reagan, we don't produce greatness anymore, and that's part of the criticism with the field of Republicans running. You look at Romney's.
What about American exceptionalism? That
well, I
seemed
believe in American exceptionalism.
more,
That's why I'm a Republican.
that
we don't have those that
threw
greatness.
that out there.
But we don't have those great leaders that we have produced in the past.
So Congresswoman, you must be tired
First of all,
of
great leaders aren't always recognized in their own time. You
Exactly.
should keep that- you should
And
keep
let
that in
me
mind.
also say that the leadership that young people are looking for are actually amongst themselves. And to the extent that we create the space for their engagement, for their growth and their development, then we're talking about building that bench of leadership that goes into the next millennium.
Absolutely.
To sit here and believe that what we're dealing with right now is the end all to be all would be very discouraging to young people. The young lady who clapped when you said that is probably the leader we're looking for, because she felt compelled to put action to your words. You see what I'm saying? There are a lot of young people out here who will take that space up and will make the difference, will do the organizing, will recognize the flaws or the missteps of the past, will use that knowledge and will build and develop the leadership base that we will all be marching to.
I got started in
I
politics
think
at the age of 18.
leaders and marching is over. And I think that one of the things that you are not understanding about the Occupy Wall Street movement, the entire establishment doesn't understand where this came from, why it's spreading so fast, and who are the leaders, right? And then they say it's leaderless. It's actually leaderful.
Exactly.
But because they are the people who started this, and it came from places like Argentina and Spain, where we've already seen this kind of horizontal organization take root. They are committed to not letting the traditional kind of leader, the guy on the horse, the charismatic speaker who you invest all your hopes in, who's going to let you down. And instead, it's DIY, or, not just do it yourself, do it ourselves. There are many, many leaders in this thing. Same with the Tea Party. When the Tea Party was in its early stages, before the Koch brothers and Americans for Prosperity moved in and tried to co-opt them with some degree of success. They are a starfish model, not a spider model, right? There's this book, The Starfish and the Spider. Movements that are built around like a spider, all you have to do is chop off the head and they're gone.
That's right.
Starfish, you cut off a leg, it grows back.
Right.
And the leaderless or leaderful movement is enabled by network technology, right? And that's why this whole issue of whether or not they have demands, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
They're making a moral claim, which is going to lead to all kinds of demands.
That's right.
And
but how you exercise a moral claim in a political
Martin
landscape
Luther,
that's highly structured.
The Civil Rights Movement didn't have to write the Voting Rights Act, okay? The guys who sat down at the lunchroom counter weren't sitting there with a copy of the Civil Rights Act of what they wanted to be enacted, right?
I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying that, for example, you were talking about government structures, and I was in Berlin not too long ago when the Pirate Party won some seats in the Berlin regional legislature. And the Pirate Party, which chose a deliberately provocative name after their incredibly boring technical name failed to get them any votes, is basically sort of like WikiLeaks as a party, an information freedom party. And in the U.S., we don't have the same structure that permits the easy development of new political actors like that.
Yeah, but at the same time, just to use the Tea Party comparison again, I mean, when they first started doing mini marches, they had one downtown and they just kind of popped up around the country. It was the moral, if you want to put it this way, the moral claim or the moral statement they had was Tea Party standing for taxed enough already, and it was in a sense relatively amorphous. Even if it was just some of them just said stop bailouts or stop spending like that, but over the course of a year or a year and a half, many of them decided to run for office themselves. Others who might have been on the sidelines thinking about running were inspired by that, and then from that, a more traditional, if you will, platform then started to develop. I think the problem, if you will put it that way, on the left in the context of the Occupy Wall Street is I'm not quite sure if they've started early enough for them to have the influence that they might want on the 2012 election, the way that the Tea Party, they started in early 2009, and by 2010 they were ready in a sense to take over the Republican Party.
So we were just hearing from Robert George. Just wanted to make sure that we have identified everyone. That's Robert George of the New York Post. And of course, we have going down the line, Micha Sifry of the Personal Democracy Forum and Tech President, and Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, and Daniel Isaacs of the GOP of New York County. And speaking of New York and region, you can go on WNYC.org now and check out the regional results for the races. But I want to go to a question. Come on up and introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, panelists. My name is Omowale Adewale. I represent MXGM. Talib had brought up that organization and game in New York City. I want to say 2008 because we're talking about some of the discontent, right, in terms of running in elections. And also what would reinvigorate voters to come out next year. Okay, 2008, you had two third parties, at least two third parties. You had Ralph Nader, Independence Party, and you had Cynthia McKinney running for the Green Party. Now, a good friend of mine, Rosa Clemente, ran on that vice presidential, as vice president candidate for a Green Party, explained that there was a blackout. I don't know if people knew that, but it was a media blackout. And so you saw at debates, just Democrats and Republicans, always. You don't see that around the world. You find that in the U.S., which talks about it's the leadership of democracy that's running rampant. So I want to ask a few questions. First, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke did ask that Okay, I'll try to keep it to one, maybe
Yeah.
1.5. That she said, she spoke of the powers that be. So I want to really define, I want to really hear the definition, who exactly is the powers that be, because you're talking about, I don't know if I'm the powers that be, because I don't have power to, to stop people from getting on this stage and actually get to the people, because you have, right now, $4.5 billion was just transferred from the banks to credit unions, which is beautiful. And that should signal that there'll be some political change as well. Now, hopefully Obama, which has the power and he's for Occupy Wall Street, will allow for there to be third parties that actually get into the discussion as well, not just Republicans, Democrats are talking amongst themselves.
So your question is, who constitutes the powers that be?
Who constitutes the powers that be if it's not Barack Obama, the president himself, that's able to, and let's be honest, because I'm going to be honest with folks, has bombed I don't know how many thousands of people throughout the years. And it doesn't matter that that I'm black. I'm not going to support Obama if he's bombing little babies and of people of color all around the world. It doesn't make any sense. And he's not speaking to any of the issues that is going on in New York City. I've been stopped 3 times. Cops did not arrest me. Straight police harassment. Doesn't speak to any of those issues. They asked me just last night, just walking in the park, and I looked a lot better than I did right now. And they will stop me. And so there's no race card because the cop was like, hey, if you don't have any warrants, you can go. But I shouldn't be even stopped. I should be allowed to walk on just like anyone else. So those are some of the issues. So I didn't want to go on, but sometimes you don't have these discussions and you really can't say them. So you got to really speak really fast and try to get as little bit of time as possible.
We seem to get that fairly often. I appreciate it.
In fairness, it should be pointed out though that the NYPD is arresting white women in the park as well. So they are kind of, I mean, there was a Time story about that just a while ago.
But not to the same extent, not the systemic. And you should know that I have sent a letter to Attorney General Eric Holder, as well as our U.S. Attorney Loretta Lynch here in New York, that there needs to be an investigation of the practices of what's happening here in the city of New York, the suspension of the civil liberties of Black and Latino men in this town. So that's already in the works. I personally spoke with him, so he knows how I feel about this. I've got 3 nephews, a father and a brother that have to go through this, and I'm going to get to the powers that be. Because I can go for a while on that one.
But the powers to be are all these people in this room who are here participating in the
That's part of it.
process.
What I'm talking about are the powers to be in Washington. And these people don't come to Washington. And that's an issue for me. That's a real issue for me. I get my emails occasionally. I get some phone calls when a major vote is coming up. But the people who show up in Washington, they become the powers that be. There's some people who are resident in Washington, so they're always the powers that be. But when people show up in Washington, when they send their emails, when they jam the phone lines, they become the powers that be. How consistent can you be? How sustained can you be in your commitment to whatever issue or concern that you have? Do you know when the votes are coming up on the floor that are going to impact on your life in the House of Representatives? These are the types of things when I'm talking about consciousness raising and being enlightened about being a part of this democracy, that it takes work. It takes those of us who are doing leadership, who are doing the tweet, hey, the bill's coming up, make sure here's the number, send it out to your people, you send it out to your people, and jam the lines when it's about to go down. That's what the powers that be do. Oftentimes, it's not the people in this room.
And to speak, another example, to speak to your point about the presidential debates, you asked who the powers that be are that organize those. They would be the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. You've got they're basically 2 co-chairmen that organize the presidential debates, and it's not in the best interests of those two parties to allow a third party on the stage. Ross Perot back in 1992 and 1996, it was basically by the power of his own personality and the ability to get on the ballot on all of the states that he basically forced
his own money.
Yeah, exactly. Forced and in a sense forced and shamed the parties into allowing him on the stage.
Not in 96.
Exactly, in 96.
He was excluded in 96. The truth is, the League of Women Voters used to run those debates, and after they let John Anderson in 1980, because he was running as an independent, get into one debate, the parties then decided to take it away from the League. And the president of the League said that she would refuse to participate in a sham on the American people. And the idea that we go through this sham every 4 years, and we let it be done, because it is not a real debate. They have a town hall version where they don't let people in the audience respond, because that's part of the contract that the campaigns sign a contract prior to the debates where they set out all the ground rules. The whole thing is a sham. And we dignify it with the word debate is one more example of how archaic and out of touch our process has got. The thing that's different this time, why this time around the debates will be a little different, is we're all sitting there with these things in our hands, right? And a lot of us are going online live during these events, and we're talking amongst ourselves. So the spinners, by the way, they have a thing at these debates. I've been in some of them. Backstage, after the debate is over, they have a section that is literally named Spin Alley, right? They call it Spin Alley. They should just call it Liar's Lane, because that's what people are doing there. They are trying to convince you that what you saw with your own eyes isn't what happened. But now, because of things like Twitter and this whole live real-time water cooler that we all can participate in, there's a little bit of a chance that they won't be able to do the same thing. And if we see something happen during these debates that is truly an affront, whether the questions are so stupid you can't believe they're asking that, or the candidate's not answering, we have an option. We can protest that. We can have an impact on it. The big question for me is, will people use the powers that they have inherent in the fact that we're citizens of this democracy to demand that the system actually be responsive? Right now, we let them get away again and again with controlling all the choke points, whether it's ballot access or campaign finance law or gerrymandering. All of these things are politicians basically taking the process away from us, the voters. And it's up to us. You want to let it happen again? Go ahead, because that's what they'll do if you let them do it.
And this actually speaks to a point that Farai was mentioned earlier on about Twitter. Sometimes, as you said, when you're looking at it, it looks like there's there's two different universes. Or I don't know if there's anybody who watches Fringe. You've got like an alternate universe where on one side one side it's all Tea Party talk, with the other side it's all Occupy Wall Street or whatever. However, when you have a big event going on, or a big political event going on, you can follow different kinds of conversations. If there's a hashtag out there, like say CNN debate or GOP debate, or something else that's going on. There's some other big event, and you click on that hashtag. You then realize how much diversity of opinion there is, and people have figured out how to get it said succinctly in that 140 characters, and then you realize that this is the real universal town hall that's developing, and the more that kind of sensibility spreads, I think is better for the broader political debate.
I agree.
We have another question.
Except not everyone is a part of that universe yet.
Yes.
And so there are going to be communities who will have other folks that will determine at the end of the day what's real and what's not. And so we have to also deal with the fact that there's some nuances to what we're trying to achieve. We're not all there yet, so we have to find alternate means so that everyone can be engaged.
I agree with that, but even some of our poorest communities, nearly everybody has a cell phone, and I'm not talking about an iPhone. I'm just talking about just kind of a regular cell phone, and you are able to participate if you can do IM. If you can do an IM, you can do a tweet.
The rate of smartphone ownership among blacks and Latinos is higher.
That wasn't my point. I didn't say they didn't have the equipment. I
They
said
have the
they're
equipment,
not a
and
part
the rate of usage of Twitter is twice as high among African Americans.
African Americans are overrepresented on Twitter.
I'm not debating that. What I'm saying is that there are parts of the communities of this nation that are not engaged in that way.
I'm with you on
that there will be a build out of it, but there need to be alternate means as well for getting them engaged.
99% don't make campaign contributions.
But let me go to. We have a questioner here.
That's fine, but we're talking about democracy.
99% of us don't make large campaign contributions.
That's agree.
The bigger perversion of democracy to me. And so you're right, not everybody is using these new tools, but enough of us, enough ordinary people, we're talking tens of millions now, that the process is going to be changed in ways that will make it more responsive, I believe, to the voices and interests of ordinary people.
And I agree, and I acknowledge that. What I want to also acknowledge that there are significant parts of this country that are not a part of the body politic through tweet, through anything. And these are the people who are being subjected to these new voter registration laws.
All right. Why don't you go ahead? Introduce yourself and give your question.
I feel odd now that I'm holding a piece of paper where I wrote notes and you guys are...
It's a great technology paper.
Well, I mean, I just wanted to let you folks know that I went to both the 9/11 Memorial and Zuccotti Park today. And they're both two very, very sad places. The first, I don't think, needs any explanation. The latter was sad to me because I saw all sorts of people, pretty much every sort of American that you could come across was upset. But I left not knowing why anybody was upset, really. I just knew that there was this Occupy Wall Street thing, and everybody was there because they were hoping to affect change. I want to ask you gurus, do you see any sort of means to capture and satisfy all that dissatisfaction?
Well, let me ask you, Daniel. You know it is a great question.
I know it's a very large question.
Yeah, let's see how much time do we have to answer.
Well, is there anything in the Occupy Wall Street movement that appeals to movement conservatives, do you think?
Passion, a true belief in something. And right, how do you channel that passion? You get involved in the political process. It's about democracy, as the Congresswoman says. I've been involved in politics since I was 18 years old in college with the college Republicans, and have been working my way up through the party ranks for the last couple of years. And it's incumbent upon the political parties to reach out to these young people, because by and large that's who's there, to tell them you're welcome. Come in, make a difference, participate. And quite frankly, speaking for the Republican Party, it hasn't been easy to do that over the years, because the powers to be didn't want young people getting involved because they saw them as a threat. And it's a shame. And that's why our party has suffered for it. And so we need to open our doors and say, yes, you have to come in. You believe strongly in something. We share common sets of principles and ideals. That's how we have to do it. It's incumbent upon us as a party to do so.
But speaking to the idea, though, if there's something in particular with Occupy Wall Street that can sort of, in a sense, cross the party lines in the way that the Tea Party did in some cases. I think
Did the Tea Party really, though?
Well, to the extent that if you looked at the voting results and compared them from 2008 to 2010, in 2008. Barack Obama won independence by about 5 to 8 points. In 2010, with the influx of the Tea Party, independents went to Republicans by between 15 and 20%. So that's just kind of one example.
But half as many people voted.
that's one example. But the point I was going to answer to answer Farai's point. If there's one area where I think there's common cause between Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party, it has to do with the idea of bailouts and rewarding the banks for their either bad or incompetent behavior by more taxpayer funds. And that was the thing that really sparked the Tea Party movement. And to the extent that there's the bailouts,
the Tea Party
absolutely.
movement took off after we passed the Affordable Health Care Act.
I'm sorry, that's not true. Man.
But the spark for spark for it was that guy going on CNBC to complain about people who, who took mortgages that were too big, and why should we bail out those suckers? It wasn't about the banks. It wasn't about TARP. That was the spark for the thing. And so, I mean, yes, you're right. I agree that the common thread is a dislike of crony capitalism, the idea that the people who are best connected, not the people with the best ideas or getting the contracts on merit, but, earmarks, all of that. There is a common thread to that between Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party. There is a dissatisfaction with this notion that the game is rigged.
Yeah.
And on that point, there may be some common ground.
And, nothing has changed. Just give me 1 second. But nothing has changed. We just look what happened a week ago with this MF Global, the 8th largest bankruptcy filing in U.S. history, where we had a very powerful politician, John Corzine, who got all this money at Goldman Sachs, basically bought himself an office in New Jersey as a U.S. senator, as a governor, went back into the private sector and actually personally lobbied the regulatory commission not to come too hard down on his business in terms, they were leveraged like 40-1. Yeah. And because of his inside connections and his access to the game that no one else had, they were allowed to run amok. They're now, 3,500 people are out of work. There's over $600 million of client funds that are missing. And that's a perfect example of why you have the Occupy Wall Street people and you have the Tea Party folks, because that's a textbook example of what is wrong with the system, and yet still nothing has changed, even though the system went to its knees in 2008.
Of course, the Tea Party's solution would be to get rid of the regulators and allow even more of a Wild West atmosphere. I don't know what the Occupy Wall Street answer is, because they haven't really gotten to that level of detail. So, from an ideological point of view, let's not mush them all together. They're not the same.
Coming from different ends, but with the same villain in their sights.
Well, I am interested in what you think of the Tea Party's influence on the Republican slate.
I think it's overstated. I think in certain areas of the country, it has made a big difference in terms of galvanizing the grassroots. But it's interesting, as an official of the Republican Party, the Tea Party movement is really not that well integrated, at least here in New York, speaking from my own experience.
But let's transition back.
That has more to do with has more to do with New York than with the Republican Party.
It's hard. It's not a lot of Tea Partiers.
New York Republicans are a different creature than the general National Party as a whole.
I've traveled and spoken with Tea Party members in other parts of the country.
New York, they talk about it's a Long Island iced tea party. They're more
But I'm serious though. Yes. When you look at the field of, it's been described as Republican speed dating. All of the different candidates.
What I had heard. Well,
just like we love you, we hate you. We love you, we hate you. Goodbye, goodbye,
Kissed
goodbye.
them all and then moved on to the next.
Did the Tea Party add volatility to that mix?
I don't think so. I don't think the Tea Party has had much of an impact on the nominating process that far.
You don't think that from Michelle Bachmann to Herman Cain,
they got their initial burst from them, but at the end, there's no staying power. But there's no staying power. They were up and they were gone.
I will say this: the weird thing, and I know it's going to sound like me as I've gone crazy, or it's kind of sacrilege to say this. But the weird thing about the Tea Party is that, given how a lot of people in the mainstream media call it racist and exclusionary and things like that, the Tea Party's impact on the Republican Party has, ironically enough, has actually made it more diverse. In terms of the people who've gotten elected, if you look at where the Republicans were in 2008 versus where they ended up in 2010, and some of the people who came elected to offices, you have a less white, more women. And I think a lot of that has to do with the.
Is that at the local level?
Actually, about
I think of Alan West.
Well, you've got two. You've now got two black Republicans in the House.
But one is not Tea Party, and he makes it very clear that he's not.
Oh, which one are you talking about? Tim Scott? Or,
That's right.
Yeah.
Though ironically enough, though he's
Republican, but he does not consider himself Tea Party.
However, interestingly enough, though, in South Carolina, which was kind of a heavy Tea Party state, whether he called himself Tea Party or not, he certainly benefited from the influx of the Tea Party. And it was interestingly enough that even in South Carolina, which of course,
well, I guess two black men is diversity.
In a Republican Party.
Compared to before.
Now let me go through.
Compared to before.
Let me go through this. Two African American Republicans in the House. We've got a Latina, Marco Rubio in Florida, Susana Martinez in New Mexico, Brian Sandoval in Nevada, Nikki Haley also in South Carolina. In fact, there are four Republican female governors now, and not every one of them ran as Tea Party candidates, but the amount of passion and the new voters that the Tea Party brought into the process, I believe, helped actually diversify the Republican Party. And we talked about Herman Cain. There's a whole lot of issues there. But anyway, let's just go on. Forget about LLHC, right? But that has been the Tea Party people are now sort of adopting him as the anti-Romney candidate. I mean, I have no idea if he's going to be
crazy meets crazy, huh?
Be that.
I mean, really, look, Herman Cain is like Newt Gingrich. I mean, he's running to improve his speaking fees and sell his books. I don't think he ever expected to get this far. He's sort of experiencing the same thing that Howard Dean experienced.
Newt Gingrich, and I work for the man, and I'm not endorsing his candidacy. His candidacy is a lot different from what Herman Cain is doing. I mean, whether you agree or disagree with Newt Gingrich, there's a resume there showing him as a much more serious, engaged individual on policy and things
compared
like
to Herman
that.
Cain.
Whether he actually has a chance to win the presidency, I don't know. But
isn't that Cain's particular appeal? That he is a tabula rasa. That's what so many people seem to find appealing about him.
Well, that says something about how people feel about politicians generally. He's running as the anti-politician candidate, but at the same time, that shows his weaknesses. For example, on foreign policy, he himself admitted he really doesn't know much about anything, whether it's talking about the Middle East, about whether China possesses nuclear weapons. I mean, he said, well, I don't know about foreign policy. Well, when you're running for president of the United States, that's a big part of the job. He's running as the non-politician.
Well, we have to get ready to wrap up, and I'm sorry we won't be able to take your question, but we hear a sigh? Okay, all right, come on up. Popular approval.
It's a real quick question. After the 2010 elections, a lot of the Republican leadership, and I didn't mean to make eye contact with you, but
you don't know anything.
A lot of the Republican leadership made a lot of changes to election laws, some minor, some major, and I heard the Congresswoman briefly mention it, and I would just like to hear everybody speak to that, and specifically for the Congresswoman, what's Congress doing about that? About these election laws?
I can't speak about the Congress on a whole, because many of the people who were behind all of these new state rights based voting rights changes are actually in the body that I'm in. What the Democrats have done is we have begun to really assess what the implications are. We've reached out to the Attorney General's office to make sure that it's on their radar. But I think it's really up to us as Americans as well to say what a step back in democracy if after such a huge push forward, and to find some few infractions and say that everyone now has to have a state-sponsored ID in order to vote. It does not promote democracy. does not promote shortening or early voting. There are a whole host of voter suppression activities taking place across this nation that, we're going to have to grapple with as a civil society. Again, I'm not one who's going to sit here and cry. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to fight, because I think that this next generation deserves better than what these folks are offering them. There is no reason under the sun that anyone who was born in this country should not be able to register and vote. No reason whatsoever.
Well, I mean, what I would say is, well, first of all, I actually think that there should be more. I think there should be more early voting, just because, as Micah said, given the 21st century we live in. But I think if you are going to have more early voting or same day registration, I don't think there's a problem with asking for proof of solid ID. I think that's a fair compromise, where if you're going to speed up the voting process, or make it easier, and voting on the same day, or registering on the same day, you need to have proof of identification.
But that's
I have no problem with that.
Doing. Well, they're rolling back the days that you can vote, and they're asking for ID, which you have to purchase, okay, which is akin to a poll tax. Okay, this is the reality of what we're dealing with. We might as well not sugarcoat it. It's happening. It's real. What our issue has to be as a civil society is whether we accept this. We don't have to accept it. If you can prove that you're a citizen of the United States, you have an address registered in a particular precinct, they need to prove that you are illegally voting. And every state has laws on the book that deals with voter fraud. So there's no reason for us to go through this again, other than to suppress the vote and disenfranchise people.
Well, it's by law. You have to have a valid, if you were stopped, whether you're white, black, Hispanic, whatever ethnicity you are, and you're stopped by the police for whatever reason, by law, you are required to produce a valid registration.
Whose law is that? That is not. That is incorrect. That is totally incorrect.
You are required to have
You are
photo
not
ID.
required to have a photo ID. That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't think. I don't think just for being stopped, unless you're in an illegal, unless you're in an area like the woman I mentioned before. She was in the park after it had closed, and she did not have an ID, and she was stopped. But I don't think that you.
It is not against the law to have no ID in America.
Okay.
All right. Well, that provoked a whole. It took me back to Arizona for a second, where I was reporting on SB 1070.
By the time I get to Arizona.
Yeah, by the time I get to Arizona. All right, so what I want from each of you before we go is one outrageous prediction that you think will come true. We've already heard a few. Okay, you're looking like you don't want to go first.
How do you define outrageous?
Yeah.
Yeah.
However you choose. I was surprised by some of the calls for the election, so that can already count as an outrageous prediction.
I think I already gave my
what about a Herman Cain outrageous projection?
I'll tell you what I'm afraid of, as opposed to a prediction.
Yeah.
It's been 10 years since 9/11, and the country is still traumatized by it, and we're, I think, really, for a variety of reasons that we don't understand. There hasn't been an incident like that since. The thing that most scares me is it doesn't take that much to panic people. And if something, God forbid, like that happens ever again, I worry about our civil liberties. I worry about Congress being able to, hold the tide and defend freedom of speech. There are all kinds of things. The Patriot Act was really scary. And we haven't really taken those walls down. So the thing that most scares me is somebody outside the United States looks at our political process, which is a little bit dysfunctional at the moment, and says, let's see how much we can mess with them. It happened in Spain, right before an election in Spain.
Like the bombing.
And, So that's the thing that terrifies me, because we're not rational people when that sort of thing happens. And God forbid it's combined with an election like this one. I don't want to think about it, but that's the world we live in.
Food for thought. Dan?
How about a Giants-Jets Super Bowl this year?
All right.
On a happier note.
That counts as outrageous.
I don't know. I think my semi-outrageous one was I kind of said it in passing that it's not out of the realm of the possibility that that the White House, the House, and the Senate could all flip, which I think at least one of those things the congressman might like. But otherwise, but actually this is not really so much an outrageous prediction, but it's sort of. A very surprising result that I don't think people could have anticipated a few years ago. That one of the areas, this was in the Wall Street Journal NBC poll that came out just today, is that on a whole lot of issues, the president is in negative territory in terms of issues, people's anticipation of how he would do on these issues versus the result. But the two areas where he's in positive, one is it's not so surprising. It's improving race relations. The other one, though, is handling the war on terror. And so God forbid anything does happen over the next year or so. But between Bin Laden and Awlaki and Gaddafi. Thank you. He's got actually a good record in that area, and something I think that it has been surprising. So if something did happen, he at least has somewhat of the bona fides of a commander in chief. So that was actually something surprising. I don't think not even some of his strongest defenders might have anticipated 3 years ago.
Congresswoman,
it wasn't surprising to me. This president has not been the type of lauding and credit that other presidents have received for doing far less than what this president has done is remarkable. It's remarkable. It's like, oh, Bin Laden, oh, let's move on. Oh, Allah, oh, let's move on. I mean, we would have been...
On to the next one.
Exactly.
On to the next one.
Somebody bring me back some money, please.
Nobody was expecting a hip-hop duet between the Congresswoman and the New York Post.
I think you found a new partner for your comedy.
I'm there for you, my brother. I am definitely there for you. My prediction is that we're going to see a lot more Southern farmers screaming about the lack of comprehensive immigration reform. That we're going to see some farmers from upstate New York screaming about the need to do comprehensive immigration reform. And that we're finally going to get serious about all of these people who are here, the needs of our nation, and how we reorganize ourselves as a civil society so that we can be more humane to one another.
All right. Well, there's going to be so much more ahead. I avoided going deep into the Herman Cain quagmire.
So
I was so tempted.
I'm a sister. I was ready to go there.
It's not too late. We might have to break it down as we move amongst the audience. But it's
just
always
trying to get that white support. One person at a time.
Whoa, you said it. I didn't. So, it's always, when you talk about politics, there's such a vast field of things to talk about. And I think obviously, although we just scratched the surface in some ways, we hit on some of the big issues, like what is the structure of American politics? Should it change? How are the two parties doing? Could there be a complete role reversal throughout the Capitol Hill establishment? And I just want to thank all of you so much for joining us. Dan Isaacs, the chair of the New York County GOP, Robert George of the New York Post, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, 11th District in Brooklyn, and Mika Sifry of Personal Democracy Forum and tech president And we want to thank The Root so much for webcasting this event from the Greene Space. Thank you so much.
It's good to see you again.